The forest is still dark when the first movement passes through the branches. Leaves tremble above a damp floor of roots, fruit skins, old tracks, and the quiet marks of animals that have crossed in the night. Somewhere in this ancient African morning, long before farms, long before firelit caves, long before any creature has a name for itself, an ape moves through the green world with the practiced balance of a body shaped by trees. It is not human. It is not chimpanzee. It is not bonobo. It belongs to a population now vanished so completely that no living eye has ever seen it, and no fossil has yet stepped forward and said, with certainty, this is the one. Yet from creatures like this, from an ancestor hidden in the broken record of deep time, two great stories will eventually begin to separate. One will lead toward the lineage that becomes us. The other will lead toward the animals we now call chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, forest strategists with their own minds, their own societies, their own long inheritance of survival. This is where the mystery begins, not with a ladder, not with a march from primitive to advanced, but with a fork almost too slow to notice. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story ahead is not the story of why chimpanzees failed to become human. It is the story of why evolution never asked them to. It is the story of how two neighbouring branches of the same ancient family were shaped by different pressures, different landscapes, different dangers, and different chances, until one branch became a creature that builds cities and writes histories, while the other remains in the forest, reading the world through fruiting trees, alliances, calls, touch, memory, and the invisible map of territory. For a long time, people imagined evolution as a staircase. At the bottom were simple animals, higher up were cleverer ones, at the top stood humans, looking back down the steps as if every other living thing were merely an unfinished version of ourselves. It is a comforting picture, and also a deeply misleading one. Chimpanzees are not failed humans. They are not relics from an earlier stage of humanity. They are modern apes, as modern in their own way as we are in ours, carrying millions of years of change since the lineages split. Their bodies, behaviours, immune systems, movements, and societies have not been frozen in time. They have been edited, tested, and reshaped by the same immense force that shaped us: natural selection working without foresight, without mercy, and without a final destination. The ancient forest does not know it is standing at the edge of a future argument. It only knows hunger, rain, fruit, predators, mating, disease, and the daily problem of staying alive. The apes inside it must solve practical questions with bodies, not theories. How to move between trees without falling. How to find ripe fruit before another mouth gets there first. How to remember which grove produces food in which season. How to read another individual's mood before getting too close. How to carry offspring safely, keep social bonds intact, avoid danger, and still have enough energy left to reproduce. In such a world, intelligence is not an abstract crown. It is a set of tools for surviving the day. A mind is useful only if it helps a body live long enough to pass its inheritance forward. Somewhere across Africa, between roughly 6 and 7 million years ago, though the exact timing remains debated, populations of apes begin to diverge. The evidence remains incomplete, and the boundary is not likely to have been a clean, dramatic split. There is no single morning when one group becomes human-bound and the other becomes chimpanzee-bound. More likely, there are scattered populations, moving through changing environments, separated and reconnected by rivers, forests, woodlands, and climate shifts. Some groups exchange genes for a time, others become isolated. Over thousands upon thousands of generations, small differences accumulate. A foot changes, a pelvis shifts, a jaw thickens or lightens, a shoulder keeps faith with the trees, a spine begins to tolerate a different posture. Selection does not announce these changes, it hides them in births and deaths. The ancestor at the beginning of this story probably does not look exactly like a chimpanzee, though for generations many people casually imagined it that way. That mistake matters. If the shared ancestor were simply a chimpanzee-like animal, waiting for humans to improve upon it, then chimpanzees would seem like living fossils and humans like the completed version. But modern research points to something stranger and more interesting. The last common ancestor may have had a mixture of traits, some familiar, some unlike any living ape. It may have been comfortable in trees, perhaps capable of moving upright in some situations, perhaps not a knuckle walker in the exact way modern chimpanzees and gorillas are. Scholars still debate its body, its habitat, and its behavior, because the fossils from this crucial interval are rare, fragmentary, and difficult to interpret. The creature at the fork remains partly a silhouette. That silhouette is important because it reminds us that both sides of the split changed. Human ancestors did not simply leave chimpanzees behind on an evolutionary road. Chimpanzee ancestors also moved forward, but along a path where the rewards were different, in dense and broken forests, in mosaics of woodland and savanna, in landscapes shaped by rainfall, fruiting cycles, parasites, rivals, and predators. Chimpanzee ancestors refined a way of life built around climbing, grasping, social tension, memory, and local knowledge. Their hands remained powerful instruments for the canopy and for manipulation. Their arms retained the reach and strength needed for trees. Their minds stayed tuned to a world where social rank, food locations, grooming bonds, and coalition politics can matter as much as any stone tool. Meanwhile, the early human branch begins to lean into a different set of experiments, though slowly and unevenly. Upright walking becomes more important. Hands are freed more often from locomotion. Diets broaden. Bodies adapt to travelling across more open spaces. Brains eventually enlarge, but not at the beginning, not all at once, and not because evolution has decided to invent philosophers. The road toward humanity is full of extinct side branches, failed experiments, and relatives who are close to us but not us. Most of them disappear. Their stories are preserved only in bones, stones, sediments, and later, in traces of ancient DNA. Our own survival can look inevitable only when seen from the wrong direction. The deeper one looks, the less the human-chimpanzee split resembles a contest. It is not a race with a winner, it is a divergence of solutions. One solution eventually produces a primate that walks habitually on two legs, depends heavily on cumulative culture, reshapes landscapes, and carries memory outside the body in symbols. The other produces a primate that remains magnificently adapted to a demanding social and ecological world, capable of tool use, planning, political maneuvering, emotional bonds, learned traditions, and local adaptation. The difference is real, enormous, and scientifically fascinating, but it is not the difference between movement and stillness. It is the difference between two kinds of movement through time. In the ancient forest, none of this is visible yet. There are only bodies in motion, searching, listening, climbing, feeding, resting, watching one another with alert eyes. The air is warm. The ground is alive with insects. Fruit falls and ferments. distant calls pass through the canopy. The future is hidden inside ordinary survival. A mother carries her young close. A male pauses at the edge of a clearing. Another ape tests a branch before trusting its weight. Their world is not primitive. It is complete, immediate, and dangerous in ways the fossil record can only hint at. What survives in the record suggests that the beginning of our story is not a clean origin point, but a vanished landscape of possibilities. And from that landscape, over a span of time too large for the mind to hold comfortably, the fork widens. The shared ancestor vanishes into extinction, as all ancestors eventually do. Its descendants keep changing. One line will someday leave footprints in volcanic ash, shape stone, carry fire, bury memory, cross continents, meet other human species, and finally wonder where it came from. The other will remain closer to the trees, but not closer to the past. Chimpanzees will continue evolving in their own direction, into beings so near to us that their faces can feel like mirrors, and so different from us that the mirror never quite answers back. The mystery is not why they stopped. The mystery is how many paths evolution can open from the same beginning, and how easily one path can mistake itself for the only one. The fork widens so slowly that no creature living through it could ever recognize the separation. A generation is born, matures, feeds, competes, bonds, and dies, and the world seems nearly the same as it was before. Then another generation follows, and another, each carrying small inherited differences that are almost invisible when viewed up close. A skull is shaped a little differently. A hip carries weight at a slightly altered angle. A hand grips with the same ancient strength, but perhaps one population uses it more often for branches, another more often for carrying, balancing, or touching the ground in a different way. Over deep time, these slight differences become ancestry. Over deeper time, ancestry becomes distance. And only millions of years later does one descendant look across a zoo enclosure, a forest clearing, or a research station and feel the unsettling familiarity of a chimpanzee's face. That familiarity has caused one of the most persistent misunderstandings in human origins. Humans did not descend from chimpanzees. Chimpanzees did not descend from humans. Neither species is the parent of the other, and neither is an unfinished draft. The two are cousins, not ancestors and descendants. Their living resemblance comes from shared inheritance, while their differences come from millions of years of separate evolution after their lineages parted. This may sound simple, but it changes the entire shape of the story. If chimpanzees are treated as living stand-ins for the ancestor, then human evolution becomes a tale of escape from chimpanzee-like beginnings. If they are understood as relatives with their own long history, then the question becomes richer and more difficult. What did the shared ancestor actually look like? And why did its descendants divide into such different forms of life? The answer is hidden behind gaps. The fossil record is not a library with every page preserved. It is more like a shoreline after a storm, where a few fragments wash up and must be fitted to vanished structures. Bones are rare accidents. They require burial, chemistry, timing, and luck. Tropical and forested environments, where many ancient apes likely lived, are often poor places for preserving fragile remains. Soil acidity, scavengers, plant growth, erosion, and geological disturbance can erase bodies long before they have any chance of becoming fossils. So the ancestor that matters most for this story, the last common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees, remains mostly unknown. Scientists can infer its existence with confidence because living species and genetic evidence demand it, but the creature itself stands in shadow. Modern genetics has sharpened the outline of that shadow by comparing human, chimpanzee, bonobo, gorilla, orangutan, and other ape genomes. Researchers can estimate how long ago different branches separated. Newer high-quality ape genomes have refined those estimates and revealed how complex the history of great apes really is. The human and chimpanzee lineages likely began diverging somewhere around 6 million years ago, give or take a margin that scholars still debate. But even this number should not be imagined as a clean cut made by a knife. Species splits can be messy. Populations may become separated, then reconnect. Genes may flow between groups for a time. Some lineages may vanish while others persist. Evolution works less like a diagram printed in a textbook and more like a river delta, dividing, crossing, drying, flooding, and leaving traces in unexpected places. The family tree of apes is therefore not a straight ladder but a branching, shadowed structure. Humans share a more recent ancestor with chimpanzees and bonobos than with gorillas. Chimpanzees and bonobos share a more recent ancestor with each other than either does with us. Gorillas branch farther back, orangutans farther still. Yet all of these living apes are only the surviving tips of a much larger ancient radiation. In the Miocene, apes were more diverse than they are today. Many forms moved through Africa and Eurasia, some known from jaws, teeth, limb bones, and skull fragments, others completely lost. The living great apes are not the whole tree. They are the remaining branches after storms have removed most of the crown. This matters because the shared ancestor of humans and chimpanzees was not living in a world with only two futures. It belonged to a broader ape landscape already rich with experiments. Some apes were large-bodied, some were smaller, some specialized in fruit, some likely exploited leaves, seeds, bark, or harder fallback foods during lean seasons. Some moved above branches, some hung below them, some climbed vertically, some walked with forms of movement that do not fit neatly into any living category. The evidence remains incomplete, but it suggests that the ancestor of humans and chimpanzees may have been neither simply chimp-like nor human-like. It may have carried a mosaic of traits that later descendants sorted in different directions. The word mosaic is important in human evolution. Features do not evolve as a package. Upright walking does not appear at the same moment as a large brain. Tool use does not require a modern human hand. Social complexity does not wait for cities. Teeth, skulls, pelvises, hands, feet, brains, and behaviors change at different rates under different pressures. This is why early hominin fossils can seem so strange. A skull may suggest one thing, a femur another, a toe bone another. Some early relatives appear to combine climbing ability with forms of upright walking. Some have small brains but altered faces or teeth. They are not halfway points on a ladder. They are populations living their own lives, each one a complete organism, not a preview of something else. On the chimpanzee side, the record is even more elusive. Fossils that clearly document chimpanzee evolution are extremely scarce compared with the fossils of some early hominins. This scarcity once encouraged the illusion that chimpanzees had barely changed. But absence of fossils is not evidence of evolutionary stillness. Genetics, anatomy, behavior, and ecology all show that chimpanzees have continued adapting. Different chimpanzee populations today carry signs of their own histories, including adaptations to local habitats and disease pressures. Some live in dense forests. Others occupy more open woodland and savanna mosaics. Some communities use particular tools or techniques that neighboring communities do not. These are not museum pieces from the human past. They are living descendants of an ancient branch that has been responding to its own conditions for millions of years. The family resemblance is still profound. Humans and chimpanzees share many aspects of biology because inheritance runs deep. The structure of hands, the forward-facing eyes, the flexible shoulders, the social attention, the long dependence of young mammals on learning, the capacity for emotion, recognition, alliance, and memory all reflect a primate background older than either lineage. But resemblance can mislead when it is treated as identity. A chimpanzee's hand may look hauntingly familiar, yet it belongs to a body organized for a different balance of climbing, knuckle walking, feeding, and social display. A chimpanzee's intelligence may feel close to ours, yet it operates inside a different communicative world, without the same kind of symbolic language or cumulative technology that becomes central to human life. Similarity does not erase divergence. It makes divergence more interesting. What survives in the record suggests that the split between humans and chimpanzees was not a single mystery with one missing bone at its center, but an entire missing landscape. To understand it, one must imagine populations spread across changing African habitats, some separated by climate and geography, some perhaps still close enough to exchange genes, all subject to ordinary pressures that only later become historically meaningful. The ancestor does not know it is ancestral. It does not know that its descendants will be compared in laboratories, sequenced in genomes, or placed on diagrams. It lives in the present, solving the problems of food, movement, reproduction, disease, and danger. From the human side, it is tempting to look backward and search for the first sign of ourselves, the first upright step, the first tool-shaped stone, the first brain expansion, the first spark of language. But the shadowed family tree asks for a quieter kind of attention. It asks us to see chimpanzees not as what we once were, but as what our relatives became. It asks us to accept that the common ancestor is gone, and that both descendant lines are transformed. One path will eventually turn toward open ground, endurance, shared symbols, fire, and vast cultural memory. The other will remain deeply tied to forests and forest edges, to climbing strength, tactical intelligence, local tradition, and the politics of living close together. Both paths begin in the same dark green inheritance. Neither path is the original. The original has vanished. Before the human line can be understood, the world that shaped it has to be rebuilt from fragments teeth in sediment, pollen grains in ancient mud, chemical signatures locked inside enamel, the ghost of rainfall in soils turned to stone. Africa before the human lineage is not a single backdrop. It is not one endless jungle suddenly opening into one endless savanna. It is a restless continent of changing habitats, where forests expand and retreat, rivers shift their courses, volcanoes lay down ash, lakes appear and vanish, and animals move through corridors that may remain open for a few thousand years before climate closes them again. In this world, apes are not rare curiosities. They are part of a broader primate experiment already shaped by millions of years of climbing, reaching, chewing, watching, remembering, and surviving in 3 dimensions. The Miocene world, stretching from about 23 million to a little over 5 million years ago, is sometimes called an age of apes, though that phrase can make it sound tidier than it was. Early and middle Miocene landscape supported many ape species across Africa and, later, Eurasia. Some lived in thick forest, others likely moved through woodland, gallery forest, swampy margins, and more open habitats. Their fossils are scattered and partial, but they show that apes once occupied a diversity of forms far greater than the small surviving group left today. Modern humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans are the last visible heirs of a much wider vanished world. The family tree did not begin as a narrow line pointing toward us. It began as a crowded, branching history, most of whose branches have been cut away. Africa itself is changing beneath them. Tectonic forces continue shaping the continent, especially in the east, where rifting alters elevation, drainage, and local climates. Mountains and highlands influence rainfall. Lakes form in basins, then shrink or dry. Volcanic eruptions cover landscapes with ash that will one day help scientists date fossils with surprising precision. Grasslands become more common in many places over time, but this does not mean forests simply disappear. Instead, habitats become patchier. Dense woodland may lie beside open grass. Riverine forest may thread through dry country like a green vein. Seasonal food may appear in one place and fail in another. For an ape, such patchiness is not scenery, it is pressure. It changes how far one must travel, what one must eat when fruit is scarce, where danger gathers, and which movements are worth the cost. The animals sharing these landscapes add another layer of force. Ancient elephants and their relatives browse and break vegetation. Antelopes and other hoofed mammals diversify as grasses spread. Carnivores patrol edges, river crossings, and open ground. Snakes, big cats, hyenas, crocodiles, eagles, insects, parasites, and infections all belong to the evolutionary weather. An ape moving through this world cannot simply be clever in a general sense. It must be clever in the right way for its surroundings. A memory for fruiting trees may matter more in one habitat than speed across open ground. A strong grip may matter more where food is above the forest floor. A flexible diet may matter more where seasonal scarcity arrives without warning. Natural selection is not selecting for superiority. It is sorting bodies and behaviors according to local problems. This is one reason the old picture of human origins, in which forests vanished and forced apes to stand up on open savanna, is now too simple. There may be truth in the role of more open environments, but no single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. Early hominins appear in mixed settings, not just treeless plains. Some seem to have combined upright walking with climbing. Some live near woodlands, wetlands, or mosaic habitats where trees remained important. Bipedalism may have offered advantages for moving between food patches, reaching, carrying, feeding in certain postures, or travelling efficiently, but it did not instantly turn an ape into a human. The earliest steps toward our lineage likely occur in landscapes where the ground and the trees both still matter. For the ancestors of chimpanzees, the pressures are different but no less demanding. Their path is not defined by refusing the open world, but by refining a life in forested and forest edge environments where climbing, social intelligence, and local ecological knowledge remain powerful. Modern chimpanzees can live in dense tropical forest, but they are not limited to an imagined Eden of closed canopy. Some populations inhabit savanna woodland mosaics, where heat, distance, seasonal water, and scattered trees create difficult conditions. This matters because it hints that chimpanzee evolution has also involved flexibility. The chimpanzee path is not merely a retreat into trees, it is a continued negotiation with varied African environments, including places where the forest thins and survival requires patience, range knowledge, and behavioral adjustment. A lesser-known detail helps break the stereotype modern chimpanzees show evidence of local adaptation, not only in behavior, but also in genetics. Different habitats and disease pressures can leave signals in populations, shaping traits related to survival in particular environments. In some regions, malaria and other infections are not background nuisances. They are powerful selective forces. A forest can be a pantry, a shelter, and a reservoir of parasites all at once. An animal's evolutionary path may be shaped as much by what it cannot see in its blood as by what it can see in the trees. This is one of the quieter lessons of modern genetics. Evolution does not always announce itself in dramatic new limbs or giant brains. Sometimes it works through immunity, metabolism, reproduction, and the ability to endure a local threat generation after generation. The ancient African world therefore gives no species an easy script. It offers changing opportunities and changing traps. A population that does well in one valley may fail when rainfall shifts. A body excellent for moving through branches may pay a cost on long open journeys. A diet focused on ripe fruit may need fallback foods when seasons tighten. A social system that protects access to territory may also bring tension and danger. In this sense, both early hominins and chimpanzee ancestors are responding to the same broad reality, a continent where survival depends on matching a way of life to a moving target. Yet the paths begin to lean apart. On one side, some ape populations increasingly exploit upright posture and eventually habitual bipedalism. Their descendants will carry this experiment into bodies with altered feet, knees, hips, spines, and skull bases. On another side, the chimpanzee lineage keeps a body deeply committed to climbing and powerful forelimb use, while also developing its own distinctive forms of ground travel, social organization, and ecological intelligence. Neither solution is complete in the abstract. Each is complete only in relation to the problems it solves. In a dense forest, the human body would not look like the obvious winner. In a long-distance open landscape under midday heat, a chimpanzee body would face different costs. Evolution has no universal champion, only local survivors. The Africa before the human line is therefore not a stage waiting for humanity to enter. It is a living, shifting world already full of ancient stories. Rain falls on forests that will leave almost no trace. Ash settles over bones that will one day become evidence. Rivers cut through sediments where teeth wait in darkness. Apes feed, climb, rest, compete, groom, and move on. Some lineages vanish without a name. Others leave descendants that will later stare at one another across a divide made of 6 million years. What survives in the record suggests that the first great separation between the human path and the chimpanzee path was not born from one event, one climate change, or one miraculous adaptation. It emerged from a continent of mosaics, where every patch of shade, every open crossing, every seasonal hunger, and every hidden disease could tilt a lineage, quietly, toward another future. The creature at the center of the puzzle remains absent, and that absence gives the story much of its power. Scientists can point toward it from many directions, but they cannot yet place a complete skeleton on a table and say with confidence that this is the last common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and bonobos. The ancestor is required by the evidence, yet hidden from direct view. It exists in the same way a vanished river can exist in a dry valley, not because anyone sees the water still flowing, but because the shape of everything around it reveals where the water must once have been. Living bodies, fossils, and genomes all bend toward this missing population. They do not reveal every feature, but they make one thing clear. Somewhere in late Miocene Africa, before the paths fully separated, there were apes whose descendants would one day become three very different kinds of living primates: humans, chimpanzees, and bonobos. The first difficulty is that the phrase last common ancestor can sound too simple. It suggests one animal, perhaps a single dramatic figure perched on a branch at the exact moment history divides. But evolution does not work through symbolic individuals. The ancestor is not one lonely ape. It is a breeding population, probably spread across a landscape, carrying variation within it. Some individuals are larger, some smaller, some have slightly different teeth, faces, arms, hips, or habits. Some live closer to river forest, others nearer woodland edges. Over generations, that population may become split by distance, climate, rivers, or ecological preference. Parts of it may continue exchanging genes for a while. Parts may vanish entirely. What later becomes a clean fork on a diagram is, in life, a blur. What can be inferred from that blur must be handled carefully. The shared ancestor is almost certainly an ape, not a monkey, with the broad features of the great ape lineage: no tail, flexible shoulders, grasping hands, forward-facing eyes, and a social life complex enough for memory, recognition, and long-term relationships to matter. It likely depends heavily on trees, because all living great apes retain powerful climbing abilities, and because arboreal life has deep roots in ape history. Yet it may not have moved exactly like a modern chimpanzee. This is one of the surprising turns in the story. For a long time, many reconstructions quietly treated chimpanzees as living models of the ancestral condition. But modern chimpanzees are specialized too. Their knuckle walking, climbing, suspensory abilities, and social behaviors are not untouched relics. They are evolved traits shaped along their own branch. The question of locomotion is especially difficult. Did the last common ancestor walk on its knuckles when it came to the ground, as chimpanzees and gorillas often do today, or did knuckle walking evolve independently in those lineages after their ancestors diverged from the human line? Scholars still debate this, because the bones involved are subtle witnesses. Wrists, fingers, shoulders, pelvises, femurs, and feet can preserve clues, but each clue is open to interpretation. Some features in early hominins suggest a strong climbing inheritance rather than a purely ground-based ancestor. Other features suggest that upright posture began to matter early. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single fossil solves the whole problem. What survives in the record suggests a creature comfortable in trees, capable on branches, perhaps able to use upright postures in certain contexts, but not already committed to the long-legged walking that later defines humans. This matters because it changes the emotional shape of the human story. If the ancestor is imagined as a chimpanzee-like knuckle walker, then bipedalism appears as a dramatic escape from an ape condition. If the ancestor is more generalized, with a mixture of climbing, reaching, careful balancing, and occasional upright movement, then human walking becomes less of a sudden revolution and more of a shift in emphasis. A posture used sometimes becomes a posture used often, a movement useful in trees, at forest edges, or while feeding becomes a foundation for travelling on the ground. Evolution often works this way. It does not always invent new parts from nothing. It changes the use, timing, and importance of older capacities. The teeth add another kind of clue. Teeth fossilize more often than many other bones, and they reveal diet, growth, and evolutionary relationships. The ancestor likely has large canines compared with humans, but the exact degree matters. In the human lineage, canine size eventually reduces, and the jaws and chewing system change in ways tied to diet and social behavior. Chimpanzees retain large canines, especially in males, where they play roles in display and competition. Yet the last common ancestor may not be perfectly represented by either pattern. It may stand between later conditions or outside them in ways that are hard to predict. Teeth can show what an animal could process, but they do not fully reveal how it lived. A jaw does not tell the whole story of a forest. The brain is even harder to recover. A skull can preserve the inner shape of the brain case, but not thoughts, emotions, calls, bonds, or intentions. The last common ancestor probably has a brain closer in size to living apes than to modern humans, but size alone can mislead. Chimpanzees are not human-brained animals, yet they are socially sophisticated, technically capable in certain contexts, and deeply attentive to the behavior of others. Bonobos, sharing the chimpanzee branch after their own later split, show another social pattern again, with different tensions, bonds, and strategies. The ancestor of all three lines may have already possessed a rich primate intelligence, but there is no reason to imagine it carried human symbolic language, cumulative technology, or the cultural machinery that later expands so powerfully in our lineage. The safer conclusion is more modest and more interesting. The raw ingredients for complex ape cognition are old, while the particular human form of cognition is later and unusual. Bonobos complicate the picture in an important way. They are often overshadowed by chimpanzees in popular comparisons with humans, but they are equally close living relatives. Chimpanzees and bonobos split from each other long after their shared branch split from ours, likely shaped in part by geography and ecology in Central Africa. Bonobos tend to show different social dynamics from common chimpanzees, and that difference warns against using any one living ape as a perfect window into the past. If two close relatives such as chimpanzees and bonobos can diverge so noticeably in behavior, then the ancestor older than both is unlikely to be captured exactly by either. Living apes are not time machines. They are evidence, but they are also outcomes. This is why the last common ancestor remains a puzzle with several kinds of pieces. Fossils provide anatomy, but only in fragments. Genetics provides timing and relatedness, but not a full body. Living apes provide comparison, but not a direct copy of the past. Environments provide pressures, but not guaranteed outcomes. When these pieces are brought together, a cautious image emerges: a late Miocene African ape, probably living in a world of trees and broken habitats, moving with a versatile body, socially aware, cognitively capable, and adapted to an ecological setting that is not identical to the world of any living species. It is not primitive in the sense of being simple. It is simply ancestral, and ancestry is not the same as inferiority. The missing ancestor also reminds us how easily a story can be distorted by survival. Humans survive, chimpanzees survive, bonobos survive. Many of their relatives do not. Because these three remain, they seem like the main characters. But in the original landscape, they are only future possibilities among many. Other apes live, adapt, and disappear without leaving descendants. Some may come close to the human line. Some may belong near the chimpanzee-bonobo branch. Some may sit in positions still argued over by specialists, known from fragments too incomplete to carry the full weight placed on them. The family tree has shadows not because science has failed, but because time destroys evidence unevenly. And still, The shadow's enough to overturn the old myth. The ancestor was not a chimpanzee waiting to become human. It was not a human waiting to stand upright. It was a vanished ape population living its own present, unaware that its descendants would become a species that asks questions about origins, and two species that continue reading forests with bodies built for another path. The puzzle does not diminish the story. It deepens it. At the center of the human-chimpanzee divide is not a missing link in a chain, but a missing world, and from that world, evolution begins to distribute its inheritances in different ways. The forest does not break all at once. It loosens. It thins in places, closes again in others, then opens somewhere else as rainfall shifts, temperatures fluctuate, and seasons grow less predictable. From the viewpoint of an ape moving through this world, the change is not a map turning from green to yellow. It is a familiar fruiting tree that produces less often, a stretch of shade that no longer connects to the next canopy, a river margin that becomes more important during dry months, a patch of woodland that demands a longer walk between feeding places. The old world remains, but it is no longer continuous in the same way. It becomes a puzzle of patches, and in a patchier world, the body itself begins to matter differently. For creatures shaped by trees, broken forest is not simply loss. It is also a new arrangement of opportunity. A dense canopy rewards arms, shoulders, curved fingers, balance, and memory of roots above the ground. A more open mosaic asks other questions. How far can a body travel between food sources? How much energy does movement cost under heat? Is it safer to cross open ground quickly, cautiously, or not at all? Can food be carried from one place to another? Can a group exploit resources that are scattered instead of clustered? These questions do not arrive as thoughts in the modern sense. They arrive as pressure. Individuals whose bodies and behaviors fit the changing pattern survive a little better, reproduce a little more successfully, and pass on traits that will look, millions of years later, like the beginning of a path. The old savanna hypothesis once told this story in a sharp and memorable way. Forests disappeared. Apes came down from the trees, and the human line stood upright on the grasslands. It had the power of simplicity, but the evidence has made the picture more complicated. Early hominins did not emerge in one uniform grassland world. Many appear connected to mixed habitats, where woodland, forest edge, wetland, and open ground existed near one another. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that the earliest changes in the human lineage happened in environments where trees still mattered. This is crucial. The first steps toward habitual bipedalism may not have belonged to a fully open country animal. They may have belonged to an ape navigating a world where climbing remained useful, but where the ground was becoming increasingly important. In such a world, upright posture can offer more than one advantage. It may help an animal reach for food while standing among branches or shrubs. It may make short movements on the ground more efficient under certain conditions. It may free the hands for carrying food, infants, or objects, though scholars still debate how important carrying was at the beginning. It may reduce exposure to direct sun on open ground, or improve the ability to scan across taller vegetation, but no single explanation fully accounts for this. Bipedalism is unlikely to have evolved for one reason alone. It is more likely that several modest advantages accumulated in certain populations until walking on two legs became not an occasional trick, but a regular strategy. This shift would have carried costs. Upright walking demands changes in balance, pelvis shape, spine curvature, knees, feet, and muscle use. A body built for committed bipedal travel gives up some of the climbing ease of earlier apes. The human lineage does not simply gain freedom of the hands, it also enters a compromise. The foot becomes less like a grasping tool and more like a spring and lever. The pelvis becomes shorter and broader. The spine becomes a balancing column. Knees angle inward to keep the body's weight under control. These changes do not appear instantly, and early hominins likely remain capable climbers in varying degrees. But once the ground becomes central, the body begins to reorganize around it. The chimpanzee path responds differently to the same broader African restlessness. Rather than becoming long-distance upright travelers, chimpanzee ancestors retain a powerful commitment to climbing and to a form of terrestrial movement that suits their anatomy. Modern chimpanzees knuckle walk on the ground, climb with strength and agility, and move through trees with a confidence no human can match without tools, training, and considerable risk. This is not a failure to transform. It is a transformation in another direction. A chimpanzee body is a solution to a life where the canopy, trunks, slopes, forest floor, and social displays all matter. It carries power in the shoulders and arms, gripping ability in the hands and feet, and explosive strength useful in climbing, feeding, mating competition, and movement through complex terrain. The breaking forest also changes diet. In stable fruit-rich environments, a primate can rely heavily on ripe fruit, though even tropical forests are never as generous as they look from the outside. In more seasonal or patchy habitats, fallback foods become important. Leaves, stems, bark, seeds, pith, underground storage organs, insects, and harder foods may become essential when preferred foods fail. Teeth and jaws can preserve hints of these pressures. So can microscopic wear patterns and chemical traces in enamel. But behavior often outruns bone. An animal can solve dietary stress with memory, travel, social tolerance, tool use, or timing, not only with a different jaw. This is part of why ape evolution is so difficult to read. The most important adaptation may leave no fossil at all. For the human lineage, dietary flexibility eventually becomes one of the great engines of expansion. Early hominins do not begin as hunters with fire and language, but over time their descendants broaden the menu dramatically. Meat, marrow, tubers, seeds, fruit, shellfish, cooked foods, and stored knowledge all become part of a widening survival strategy. This widening does not happen in the first moment of the split, but the ecological groundwork may begin when habitats become less predictable. A body that can travel farther, hands that can manipulate more freely, and social learning that helps individuals exploit varied foods all become increasingly valuable. The path toward humanity is not just a path toward bigger brains. It is a path toward flexibility under uncertainty. Chimpanzees also show flexibility, but within a different frame. Modern communities vary in what they eat, how they forage, what tools they use, and how they move through their ranges. Some use sticks to fish for termites. Some crack nuts with stones or wood. Some use leaves as sponges. Some communities show traditions absent from others, even when the animals are capable of learning them. These differences are not random decoration. They reveal that chimpanzees live in cultural and ecological worlds shaped by local conditions. A forest fragment, a termite species, a nut-bearing tree, a seasonal water source, or a disease environment can influence behavior across generations. Recent genetic work has strengthened the same point from another direction. Chimpanzees are not one unchanged relic population. but a set of living populations adapted to different habitats and pressures. Disease may be one of the least visible forces in this divergence. A changing environment can rearrange parasites, insects, water sources, and contact between species. Malaria and other infections can shape survival as surely as predators or hunger. The body's immune system becomes a battlefield written in DNA. These changes are hard to dramatize because they do not leave stone tools or footprints, but they matter deeply. An ape lineage can be altered by the ability to resist a pathogen in a particular forest, just as much as by the ability to walk across open ground. Evolution often leaves its most important signatures in places the eye cannot see. As forests break into mosaics, social life also shifts. Scattered food can change group size, ranging patterns, competition, and cooperation. If resources are clumped, individuals may gather and compete intensely. If resources are spread thin, they may separate, track one another, or rely on long memory. Chimpanzee societies, with their fission-fusion pattern, show one powerful solution: individuals move in changing parties within a larger community, adjusting daily association according to food, social tension, mating, and opportunity. The human lineage will eventually develop another solution, leaning heavily into cooperation, shared attention, teaching, language, and cultural storage. But in the beginning, the difference may have been far smaller, a subtle tilt in how bodies moved and how groups used space. The breaking forest, then, is not a simple disaster scene. It is a slow reorganization of possibility. Some apes follow the trees where they remain thick. Some exploit edges. Some vanish. Some experiment with movement on the ground. Some refine climbing and local ecological knowledge. The human path and the chimpanzee path do not split because one sees the future and the other refuses it. They split because different populations meet different versions of Africa's changing world, and each version rewards different answers, out of scattered shade, dry seasons, fruiting failures, open crossings, hidden infections, and the daily arithmetic of energy. The fork grows wider. One branch begins turning the ground into a home. The other continues mastering a world where the trees, though broken, still hold the key. As the fork widens, the difference begins to settle into bone. Not all at once, and not in the clean, dramatic way museum displays can sometimes imply, but gradually, through the architecture of bodies forced to solve different problems. A chimpanzee standing briefly on two legs can look startlingly human for a moment, especially when seen from a distance. A human climbing a tree can feel, awkwardly and imperfectly, the pull of an older inheritance. Both bodies remember the ancient ape condition in different ways, yet beneath the surface resemblance, the engineering has changed. One body is built around a powerful partnership between trees and ground, with long arms, mobile shoulders, gripping feet, curved fingers, and a forward-leaning form of knuckle walking. The other becomes increasingly reorganized around upright balance, long-distance travel, freed hands, and a foot that gives up grasping in exchange for pushing the body across the earth. The chimpanzee body is sometimes described as primitive, but that word does more harm than good. A chimpanzee is not a rough draft of a human. It is a specialist in a demanding physical world. Its arms are long and strong, its shoulders allow a wide range of movement, and its hands can grip branches, trunks, food, and tools with impressive control. The fingers are curved in ways that help with climbing and suspensory movement. the feet retain a grasping big toe, turning them into active instruments rather than passive platforms. A chimpanzee does not merely walk through its world, it climbs, pulls, braces, hangs, scrambles, descends, and launches itself across gaps where a human body would hesitate. What looks to us like raw strength is also a form of precision, a body reading surfaces through contact. Knuckle walking is part of this solution, but it is not as simple as four-legged walking with hands turned into feet. When chimpanzees move on the ground, they bear weight on the backs of their middle finger bones, protecting the long fingers that remain useful for climbing. The wrist, hand, forearm, shoulder, and trunk all participate in this distinctive locomotion. Gorillas also knuckle walk, which once encouraged the assumption that the shared ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas must have done the same. Yet the evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate whether knuckle walking was inherited from a common ancestor or evolved in similar forms more than once among African apes. This uncertainty matters because it warns against imagining modern chimpanzees as living fossils. Their way of moving is not a frozen ancestral default. It is an evolved strategy with its own history. The human body moves in another direction, and the changes required are profound. Habitual bipedalism is not just standing up. It is a full-body negotiation with gravity. The skull must balance differently on the spine. The spine curves to keep the torso upright. The pelvis becomes shorter and broader, forming a basin that supports organs and anchors muscles needed for walking. The femurs angle inward so the knees fall under the center of mass. The feet become weight-bearing levers, with arches, aligned toes, and a big toe brought into line with the others. The arms shorten relative to the legs. The hands are no longer used for normal locomotion, allowing them to become increasingly available for carrying, gesturing, tool use, and later, the fine manipulations that help make human technology possible. This transformation is often treated as liberation, and in one sense it is. Free hands matter. A hand not needed to support body weight can carry food, hold tools, touch, signal, prepare, share, and eventually shape stone with growing skill. But bipedalism is also a bargain. The human body pays for it. Human lower backs are vulnerable. Knees and hips carry heavy loads. Feet lose the grasping power that would make life in the canopy easier. Upright birth anatomy becomes complicated in the human lineage as pelvis shape, brain size, and development interact in difficult ways. No evolutionary path gives everything for free. The body that can walk for hours under the sun is not the body that can climb like a chimpanzee. A gain in one world can become a weakness in another. Early hominins show how gradual and uneven this bargain was. They do not appear as modern humans suddenly placed in ancient landscapes. Instead, fossils suggest combinations of traits that can feel strange because they do not fit neatly into living categories. Some early hominins show evidence consistent with upright walking, while also preserving features linked to climbing or life around trees. Ardipithecus, for example, is often discussed because it seems to combine forms of bipedal movement with a grasping big toe and other traits that do not match modern humans or modern chimpanzees perfectly. Australopithecus later shows more committed bipedal anatomy, yet still retains upper body features suggesting climbing remained part of its life. The path toward the human body is not a single clean break from the trees. It is a long period of mixed solutions. One lesser-known point is that bipedalism appears before dramatic brain enlargement. This overturns a common assumption. Humans did not first become big-brained thinkers and then decide to walk upright. The walking came early, while brains remained relatively small compared with later Homo. This means the first major divergence between the human path and the chimpanzee path was not simply intelligence, it was locomotion, posture, ecology, and the reorganization of daily movement. The upright experiment begins as a bodily solution before it becomes part of a cognitive and cultural revolution. Only later do expanding brains, stone tools, cooperative foraging, fire, language-like communication, and cumulative culture deepen the separation. The chimpanzee body, meanwhile, continues to serve a world where vertical space remains central. Its shoulder blades sit in a position that favors overhead movement. Its arms can generate tremendous force. Its hands and feet work together in climbing. Its body can move quickly through complex forest structures, then descend to the ground and travel in a different mode. In open woodland or savanna mosaics, this body faces costs, especially when long travel and heat are involved. But chimpanzees are not helpless outside dense forest. Some populations use sparse woodland, seasonal ranges, and difficult terrain with considerable skill. Their anatomy is not a refusal of adaptation. It is a compromise that keeps access to trees while allowing ground movement when needed. The human body's compromise becomes increasingly committed to endurance. Later humans will become exceptional long-distance walkers and runners among primates, with features that help stabilize the head, store and release energy in tendons, cool the body through sweating, and cover wide ranges. These later adaptations are not all present at the beginning, but they grow from the same shift toward terrestrial life. To a chimpanzee, the human body may seem underpowered in the arms, poor in the trees, oddly balanced, and vulnerable at close range. To a human, the chimpanzee body may seem inefficient for distance and unable to carry the same load of tools, food, and symbolic culture. Each judgment is correct only from inside one way of life. So the split becomes visible as a contrast between strategies. Chimpanzees retain and refine a body of vertical power, grasping versatility, explosive strength, and forest edge competence. Hominins increasingly build a body of upright balance, ground travel, manipulative freedom, and eventually endurance. The same ancestral inheritance is being divided and reshaped. Hands, feet, shoulders, hips, spines, and skulls do not change because one lineage is destined for greatness and the other is left behind. They change because selection rewards different answers in different places. The forest and the ground are both ancient teachers, and they write their lessons into skeletons. Millions of years later, when humans look at chimpanzees and feel both kinship and distance, they are seeing the result of that long anatomical argument, two bodies descended from one vanished past, each carrying a different solution to the problem of being an ape in a changing world. The upright experiment begins in fragments, and that is fitting, because the beginning itself is fragmentary. It does not arrive as a complete skeleton walking confidently out of the Miocene dust. It arrives as a skull distorted by time, a thigh bone with a debated signal, teeth worn by vanished diets, a foot that seems to remember branches, a pelvis crushed and reconstructed with patient caution. Each fossil carries a small piece of a much larger change, and none carries the whole story alone. The early human lineage is not a parade of increasingly human figures. It is a scattered record of apes testing a new balance between tree and ground, between old inheritance and new opportunity, between the body that had carried their ancestors through forests and the landscapes that were beginning to ask for something different. One of the earliest names placed near the base of this story is Sahelanthropus chadensis, known from Central Africa and dated to roughly 7 million years ago. Its most famous fossil is a skull, nicknamed Tumai, with a face that seems surprisingly flat in some respects, and a small brain case still very much within the range expected for an ape of that antiquity. The position of the opening where the spinal cord enters the skull has been argued to suggest a more upright head posture, possibly connected to bipedalism. But the evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate exactly where Sahelanthropus belongs. Is it close to the human lineage after the split from chimpanzees, or is it a related ape near the branching point, or something more difficult to place? The fossil is powerful because it appears near the right time, in the right broad evolutionary neighbourhood. But it is also a reminder that the first hints of humanity are not simple. Its location is one of the surprising details. Sahelanthropus was found far from the famous East African fossil regions that dominate many origin stories. Its presence in what is now Chad suggests that early hominin evolution, or at least the evolution of close relatives, may have been spread across a wider African geography than once imagined. The human story does not begin only in one valley, one rift, or one iconic landscape. It likely unfolds across shifting regions, with populations moving, isolating, adapting, and disappearing in places where preservation is uneven and discovery is partly a matter of chance. A fossil found in Central Africa does not erase East Africa's importance, but it widens the map. It hints that the earliest chapters may have been written across a continent more complex than the old diagrams allowed. Another early figure, Orrorin tuganensis, comes from Kenya and dates to around 6 million years ago. Here the clues are different. The fossils include pieces of thigh bone, and the femur is one of the most important witnesses in the case for early walking. In a habitual biped, the thigh bone carries stresses differently from the femur of a quadrupedal ape. The internal structure, the shape of the neck, and the way the bone handles weight can suggest how often the animal moved upright. Some researchers have argued that Orrorin shows signs of bipedalism, perhaps even a more human-like loading pattern than expected so early. Yet caution remains necessary. Fragmentary bones are asked to answer enormous questions, and no single fragment can bear the whole burden without debate. Still, if Orrorin does belong near the human line, it tells a striking story. Upright walking begins while much of the body may still be deeply tied to climbing. The ancient experiment is not a creature abandoning trees in a single evolutionary gesture. It is an ape whose lower limb may be changing while other parts of the body remain suited to branches. This mosaic pattern appears again and again. Evolution does not replace the whole animal at once. It alters parts under pressure, leaving other parts to continue doing older work. An early hominin can be both a walker and a climber, not because it is confused, but because its world still rewards both abilities. Ardipithecus brings the puzzle into clearer, stranger focus. Ardipithecus ramidus, dated to about 4.4 million years ago in Ethiopia, is one of the most important early hominins because it preserves enough anatomy to challenge easy assumptions. It has a small brain, a grasping big toe, and arms and hands that do not match a modern human pattern. Yet its pelvis and other features have been interpreted as evidence for a form of upright walking. It does not look like a chimpanzee. It does not look like a human. It does not even fit neatly as a halfway form between the two. That is precisely why it matters. Ardipithecus suggests that the last common ancestor and the earliest hominins may have been unlike any living ape, and that the human line's first steps were taken by bodies still very comfortable with trees. The world of Ardipithecus also complicates the old open savanna story. Evidence from its environment points toward woodland and forested settings, rather than a fully open grassland. This does not mean open habitats played no role in human evolution. It means the earliest bipedal adaptations may have been useful in mixed environments where trees remained close. Food was varied, and movement between ground and branches formed part of daily life. Bipedalism may have begun not as a heroic march across empty plains, but as a practical posture in a broken woodland, a way to move, feed, reach, balance, or carry in a landscape where the canopy no longer provided one continuous road. By the time Australopithecus appears, the upright experiment has become more visible. Australopiths lived between roughly 4 and 2 million years ago, with different species occupying different times and places across Africa. They still had small brains compared with later humans, but their bodies show stronger commitment to bipedalism. Their pelvises, knees, legs, and feet indicate that walking on 2 legs was central to their lives. The famous footprints at Letoli, preserved in volcanic ash in Tanzania and dated to about 3.66 million years ago, give one of the most haunting glimpses of this world. They are not bones, they are movement itself turned to stone. Individuals walked across damp ash, and the ash hardened, preserving a brief passage across an ancient landscape. The prints show a form of upright walking already established long before large human brains, long before cities, long before writing, long before the technologies that people often mistake for the beginning of humanity. Yet even Australopithecus does not sever the connection to trees completely. Some species retain features in the arms, shoulders, fingers, and upper body that suggest climbing remained important. This has led to long debates. Were Australopiths frequent climbers, or were some climbing-like features evolutionary leftovers? Did different species vary in how much time they spent in trees? The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every fossil. But the broader pattern is clear enough: walking came first, and the full human body came much later. The early hominin is not a modern person with an ape's head. It is an animal adapted to its own world, upright enough to transform the future, yet still carrying the forest in its limbs. This early walking changes more than movement, it changes what the hands can become. At first, freed hands do not immediately create advanced technology. Stone tool traditions appear later and develop unevenly, but once hands are no longer required for ordinary locomotion, they become available more often for carrying food, manipulating objects, social touch, gesturing, and experimenting with materials. The importance of this may have grown slowly. A hand that carries a piece of food from one patch to another is not yet a hand that builds a spear, paints a cave, or writes a name. But the opening is there. Evolution often begins with small freedoms that later become enormous. For chimpanzee ancestors, this same period does not represent a failure to make the upright turn. Their own lineage continues along a route where powerful climbing, grasping feet, long arms, and knuckle walking remain useful. The contrast grows clearer only because the hominin body begins to reorganize so visibly around the ground. But the chimpanzee path is still alive with adaptation. While early hominins refine upright travel, chimpanzee ancestors refine another: balance trees and ground, fruit and fallback foods, social alliances and territorial knowledge, learned behaviors and inherited biology. The difference is not that one lineage changes and the other does not. The difference is which parts change most, and why. The upright experiment, then, is not the moment humans become human in the modern sense. It is the moment one branch begins making a deep anatomical commitment that will later allow other changes to gather around it. The brain will expand later. Technology will intensify later. Language, symbolic culture, long-distance migration, and the strange human ability to live inside shared imagined worlds all lie far ahead. At this stage, the story is quieter. An ape stands, walks, climbs, feeds, watches, and survives in a changing African landscape. Its body is not aiming at us. It is answering the day. But in those answers, written into thigh bones, pelvises, footprints, and the curve of a foot, the path toward humanity becomes harder to reverse. The fork that began invisibly in the forest is now pressed into the ground, while the hominin footprints harden in volcanic ash. The other branch leaves fewer marks for the ground to remember. Chimpanzee ancestors do not make a trail that fossil hunters can follow with the same confidence. Their world is wetter, greener, more acidic, more likely to digest bone before stone can preserve it. They live in places where roots break remains apart, where rain moves soil, where scavengers and microbes erase bodies before geology has time to intervene. This absence has shaped the imagination almost as much as the evidence itself. Because early hominin fossils are more visible, the human line can seem active and progressive, while the chimpanzee line can seem like a silent background. But silence in the fossil record is not silence in evolution. It is only silence in preservation. To understand the chimpanzee path, one has to stop looking for the kind of change that announces itself in stone tools, long legs, or expanding brain cases. Their story is written in a different script in shoulders built for power, in hands and feet that negotiate bark and branch, in digestive flexibility, in social memory, in local traditions, and in the genetic traces of adaptation to particular habitats and infections. A chimpanzee is not a leftover from the Miocene. It is a highly adapted African ape whose body and behavior make sense inside a world where trees remain essential, even when the forest is not continuous. The old mistake was to imagine that because chimpanzees resemble the common ancestor more than humans do in some obvious ways, they must have changed less. The more careful view is that they change differently, and often in ways that do not fossilize easily. A chimpanzee forest is not just a collection of trees, it is a living map of food, memory, risk, rank, and opportunity. Fruit ripens in patterns that can shift across seasons and years. A tree that matters in one month may be useless in another. Termite mounds, nut trees, water sources, sleeping sites, travel routes, boundary areas, and safe resting places form a mental geography that must be learned and updated. Individuals do not simply wander through greenery. They move through a remembered landscape. They know where food has appeared before, which areas are worth revisiting, which companions are useful, which older individuals possess knowledge, and which social tensions are better avoided. In such a world, intelligence is not measured by whether an animal builds a city. It is measured by whether it can live inside complexity without written maps, stored grain, or spoken explanations. Modern chimpanzees show a remarkable pattern known as fission-fusion social organization. A wider community exists, but its members do not all travel together all the time. Instead, they form smaller temporary parties that change through the day. One group may feed together, another may rest elsewhere, others may travel, groom, search, or join again later. This system allows flexibility in response to food availability and social pressures. When fruit is abundant, larger gatherings may be possible. When food is scattered, smaller parties may reduce competition. It is a subtle social solution to a changing ecological problem. It also demands memory. Individuals must track relationships across separations, remember alliances, recognize shifting moods, and understand who is present or absent. The forest is not empty space between social events. It is the medium through which social life moves. Their physical mastery is equally specific. Chimpanzees climb with a confidence that makes human climbing look cautious and improvised. Their long arms and powerful upper bodies allow them to ascend trunks, cross branches, hang, brace, and descend rapidly. Their feet remain grasping tools, not merely platforms. Their hands can grip a branch one moment and manipulate a stick or piece of fruit the next. On the ground, knuckle walking protects long fingers that remain important for arboreal life. This is a compromise, but it is not a poor one. It permits access to both ground and canopy, allowing chimpanzees to exploit layered environments. A human foot is excellent for walking long distances, but it has almost forgotten how to hold a tree. A chimpanzee foot still remembers. One lesser-known point is that chimpanzees are not confined to deep rainforest. Some populations live in savanna woodland mosaics where trees are scattered. Temperatures can be high, and resources are more seasonal. These communities show that chimpanzees are more ecologically flexible than the popular image suggests. They may travel farther between resources, use caves or shaded areas in some landscapes, adjust activity patterns in response to heat, and rely on detailed knowledge of where water and food can be found. The evidence remains incomplete for reconstructing how ancient chimpanzee ancestors handled similar habitats. But modern populations make one thing clear. The chimpanzee path is not simply a retreat into closed forest. It is a way of being an ape that remains anchored to trees while still negotiating the broken edges around them. Genetics now adds another layer to this picture. Recent studies of chimpanzee diversity show that populations have their own histories and adaptations. Some genetic differences appear linked to local habitats and disease pressures, including infections such as malaria. This is a powerful correction to the idea of evolutionary stillness. A body can be changing under selection even when its overall silhouette remains familiar. The immune system can evolve, metabolism can evolve, reproductive timing, stress responses, sensory abilities, and disease resistance can all be shaped by local conditions. Evolution is not obligated to produce a dramatic new posture in order to be real. Sometimes another path is hidden in blood, cells, and survival against parasites that leave no fossil trace. Chimpanzees also remain masters of materials in a way that is easy to underestimate. They use sticks, stems, leaves, stones, and other objects in different communities for different purposes. Some fish for termites with carefully selected probes, some crack nuts with hammer and anvil stones or pieces of wood. Some use leaves to soak up water, clean the body, or inspect injuries. These behaviors are not identical everywhere. Their distribution suggests traditions, learning, and local history. In some cases, chimpanzees appear sensitive to the properties of materials, choosing tools that bend, resist, or function better for a task. This does not make their technology the same as human technology. It does not show open-ended cumulative engineering on the human scale, but it shows that the chimpanzee mind is not trapped in instinct alone. It observes, remembers, learns, and refines. The difference lies partly in accumulation. Human culture eventually becomes a system in which improvements can build across generations far beyond what any one individual could invent alone. Stone tools become more standardized. Fire changes food and landscape. Language allows knowledge to be compressed, transmitted, argued over, and stored in memory with unusual power. Chimpanzee culture is real, but it appears more limited in its cumulative reach. A technique may persist locally, and young individuals may learn by watching others, but the system does not snowball into agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy, or written law. This does not mean chimpanzees lack intelligence. It means their intelligence operates within a different social, anatomical, and communicative structure. Evolution left them on another path because that path continued to work. Their social world is not gentle or simple, but it is deeply ordered. Rank, alliance, grooming, reconciliation, maternal bonds, mating strategies, and territorial knowledge all shape daily life. A chimpanzee must know not only where food is, but where it stands among others. Grooming is not mere hygiene. It is social currency, reassurance, tension management, and relationship maintenance. Calls carry information. Gestures coordinate movement and interaction. Faces, posture, and touch matter. The forest is full of signals, many of them quiet. Human observers often notice the dramatic moments first, but much of chimpanzee life is made from small adjustments. Who sits near whom? Who shares a space? Who approaches carefully? Who waits? Who watches? This is why calling chimpanzees left behind gets the story exactly wrong. Left behind by what? By cities? Perhaps. By written language? Certainly. By the peculiar human spiral of tools, symbols, fire, migration, and memory stored outside the body, but not by evolution. Chimpanzees have remained within a demanding adaptive zone where their bodies and minds continue to answer real pressures. They survive not because they are unchanged, but because they are fitted, imperfectly but powerfully, to worlds where human advantages would not automatically rule. A person alone in a chimpanzee forest, without tools, trails, shelter, or shared knowledge, would quickly discover that intelligence is not one thing. It depends on the world asking the question. So while the hominin line walks farther into the open, the chimpanzee line deepens its command of forest and edge. It keeps the old vertical inheritance alive, but not as a museum piece. It turns that inheritance into a living strategy climb when climbing solves the problem. Descend when the ground offers a route. Remember where fruit will return. Learn the tool traditions of the community. Manage alliances, endure disease, and read a landscape that changes with every season. The path is not lesser because it did not lead to us. It is simply not our path. And in the green light beneath the canopy, where branches cross like old decisions, chimpanzees continue to show what another successful answer to the ape inheritance can look like. Intelligence does not appear in the forest as a glowing line dividing humans from everything else. It appears in quieter forms first, in remembering where fruit ripens after long intervals, in recognizing the temper of another individual before approaching, in selecting the right stem for a hidden insect nest, in knowing when to stay close to allies and when to disappear into leaves. Long before human intelligence becomes visible in carved bone, shaped stone, painted walls, or cities, ape intelligence is already working inside bodies that must solve social and ecological problems every day. The mistake is to imagine that intelligence has only one proper destination. The deeper story is stranger. Chimpanzees and humans both inherit a powerful primate mind, but each lineage stretches that inheritance in different directions. The chimpanzee mind is often most visible when it uses tools. A chimpanzee fishing for termites is not merely poking randomly into earth. It may choose a flexible stem, strip leaves, adjust the tool's end, insert it with care, then withdraw it covered with insects. In some communities, chimpanzees crack nuts using stones or wooden clubs against natural anvils, a behavior that requires selecting materials, positioning the nut, controlling force, and learning through repeated practice. In others, leaves become sponges for drinking water, or tools for cleaning, wiping, inspecting, and communicating. The surprising detail is not simply that chimpanzees use tools. It is that tool use varies from place to place, as though different communities carry local habits through social learning. A chimpanzee born into one forest may inherit not only genes, but a practical tradition of how things are done there. Recent work has made this harder to dismiss as simple instinct. Chimpanzees can be sensitive to the properties of tool materials. They may choose stems or sticks with useful flexibility, strength, or shape for particular tasks. That does not mean they understand engineering in the human sense, and it would be misleading to make them into tiny forest scientists. But it does mean their material world is not meaningless to them. They test, select, modify, and remember. Their technology is modest beside human technology, but it is not empty. It reveals a mind able to link object, action, body, and reward in ways that require attention and learning. The human lineage takes tool use onto a different plane, but even here the difference emerges gradually. Early stone tools do not appear as masterpieces. They're simple flakes, cores, sharp edges, pounding stones, and cutting implements, often difficult to connect to one species with complete confidence. Over time, however, something changes in the human branch. Tools become more standardized, more transportable, more dependent on sequences of action, more connected to shared knowledge. A stone flake can cut meat, scrape hide, work wood, or process plants. But the deeper significance is not the stone alone. It is the memory behind it, the ability to repeat a technique, the social world in which the technique can be watched, learned, improved, and passed on. This is where human culture begins to take on an unusual power it accumulates. Chimpanzee culture exists, but it does not accumulate in the same runaway way. A termite fishing technique may last across generations. A nut-cracking tradition may be maintained in one region and absent in another. A gesture, grooming style, or foraging practice may spread through observation. Studies of wild individuals increasingly suggest that social learning in chimpanzees is broad, not limited to the most dramatic tool behaviors. They watch everyday actions feeding choices, grooming patterns, movement, and practical routines. The forest teaches through other bodies, yet the result does not become a widening technological archive comparable to the human one. Chimpanzees do not build on old innovations until they produce compound machines, symbolic records, or institutions. Their culture is real, but its ceiling appears lower, and scholars still debate exactly why. One answer lies in communication. Chimpanzees communicate with calls, gestures, facial expressions, posture, touch, and movement. Their vocal lives are more flexible than once assumed. Research on call combinations suggests that chimpanzees can combine sounds in ways that expand meaning, giving their communication more structure than a simple set of emotional cries. They can signal danger, food, movement, social excitement, distress, and intention in ways that others understand. But human language crosses a different threshold. It is symbolic, combinatorial, displaced from the immediate present, and capable of carrying information about things not visible, not nearby, not even real. A human can describe a hunt that happened yesterday, a place beyond the hills, a tool that does not yet exist, an ancestor long dead, or a rule everyone agrees to follow. Language turns thought into shared architecture. This difference transforms memory. Chimpanzees remember richly. They remember individuals, past interactions, food locations, social outcomes, and useful behaviors. Their memory is embedded in direct experience and observation. Humans add another layer. Memory becomes external. It moves into spoken tradition, ritual, marks, later writing, images, calendars, maps, and institutions. A chimpanzee community can preserve a tool practice. A human community can preserve a migration route, a mythic origin, a seasonal schedule, a legal code, a recipe, a boat design, or a warning about a disaster no living person witnessed. This does not make human memory perfect. In fact, human memory can distort and mythologize with great confidence, but it makes human culture capable of outliving individual bodies in a radically expanded way. Brains are part of this divergence, though not in the crude sense that bigger automatically means better. Human brains eventually become much larger than chimpanzee brains, but the more important changes include development, connectivity, regulation, timing, and the way different brain regions interact. Modern genetic research has drawn attention to regions of DNA that changed rapidly along the human line after the split from chimpanzees. Some of these regions appear involved in regulating genes during brain development. This does not mean there is one gene for being human, or one switch that creates language, imagination, or civilization. The evidence remains incomplete, and brain evolution is too complex for simple causes. But it does show that the human path involved not only new anatomy, but altered developmental programs, different patterns of when genes turn on, where they act, and how neural systems are assembled. Chimpanzee cognition, however, keeps resisting easy dismissal. Experiments suggest that chimpanzees can revise expectations when presented with new evidence. They can solve problems, understand aspects of cause and effect, recognize social relationships, and sometimes anticipate what others may do. They are not human minds trapped in 8 bodies, but neither are they instinctive machines. The difference between chimpanzee and human intelligence is not the presence or absence of thought. It is a difference in scale, structure, social transmission, symbolic reach, and ecological purpose. Chimpanzee intelligence is tuned to the forest community. Human intelligence becomes increasingly tuned to shared worlds that can be imagined, taught, enforced, and rebuilt. Cooperation follows the same pattern. Chimpanzees cooperate, form alliances, hunt in groups in some contexts, groom, reconcile, support, and learn from one another. Their social world can be politically subtle and emotionally intense. Humans also inherit primate social intelligence, but expand cooperation across wider networks, including individuals who are not close kin, not immediate companions, and eventually not personally known at all. This depends on language, shared norms, reputation, punishment, teaching, and the ability to imagine belonging to something larger than the present group. Such cooperation becomes one of humanity's great powers, but it is also unstable and dangerous. The same mind that builds trust can build rivalry, exclusion, and myth. No evolutionary gift is purely gentle. By this point, the fork is no longer only in hips, hands, or feet. It is in the way knowledge moves. In chimpanzees, knowledge flows through observation, practice, social attention, and local tradition, closely tied to place. In humans, Knowledge begins to flow with increasing force through teaching, language, imitation, symbols, and later technologies of memory. The chimpanzee branch remains brilliant at living inside a specific ecological and social world. The human branch becomes increasingly dangerous and powerful because it can carry worlds inside the mind, then force landscapes to match them. Both begin with ape intelligence. One becomes a forest intelligence, embodied, immediate, tactical, and local. The other becomes a symbolic intelligence, cumulative, restless, and increasingly able to survive outside the environments that first shaped it. Evolution does not choose one as the true form of intelligence. It simply reveals that minds, like bodies, evolve toward the problems they must solve. Once the human branch becomes more committed to the ground, distance begins to change the rules. A body that can walk efficiently is not merely moving in a different posture, it is entering a wider geography. Food no longer has to be found only where climbing can reach it. A group can travel between patches, follow seasonal resources, cross exposed ground, return to known places, and slowly stretch its world beyond the immediate shelter of trees. This does not happen suddenly. The earliest upright walkers are not already explorers in the later human sense. They are animals moving through ancient African landscapes with small brains, vulnerable bodies, and no guarantee that their experiment will last. But the ground offers a new kind of possibility. It rewards endurance, planning, cooperation, and flexibility. And over time, those rewards begin to gather around the human lineage like invisible weather. Diet is one of the first places where the shift becomes powerful. A chimpanzee diet can be broad, and chimpanzees are skilled opportunists, but their lives remain strongly tied to the rhythms of fruit, leaves, insects, and locally available foods. Early hominins inherit a primate interest in varied resources. Yet as their descendants become more terrestrial, the menu expands in ways that will eventually reshape bodies and societies. Meat and marrow become increasingly important at certain times and places, though scholars still debate the exact timing, frequency, and methods of early meat acquisition. Some carcasses may have been scavenged, some small animals may have been captured. Later, hunting becomes more organized. Stone flakes can cut hide and tendon. Hammerstones can crack bones to reach marrow. The animal body becomes not only a source of food, but a problem to be solved with tools, timing, attention, and shared access. This matters because high-quality foods can change evolutionary possibilities. Meat, marrow, and later cooked foods provide dense energy, but they also require risk and social negotiation. A carcass can attract predators. A tool edge can open flesh, but it cannot protect a lone individual from every danger. Food worth sharing can create alliances, obligations, theft, conflict, cooperation, and memory. Who found it, who cut it, who received it, who was excluded, and who helped defend it may all matter. The evidence remains incomplete, especially for the earlier stages, but what survives in bones marked by stone tools and in the spread of archaeological sites suggests that the human branch increasingly builds survival around foods that demand more than simple gathering. The meal becomes a social event, not just a biological intake. Fire later deepens the transformation, though it too must be treated carefully. Popular stories often make fire sound like a single discovery, one bright night when humanity steps permanently out of darkness. The archaeological record is less tidy. There are early hints and debated traces, then stronger evidence later for controlled use of fire. No single explanation fully accounts for when, where, and how fire became a routine part of human life. But once fire is controlled reliably, it changes almost everything. It softens food, makes some plants safer or easier to digest, extends activity into dark hours, provides warmth, deters some predators, shapes social gathering, and transforms landscapes. Fire is not just a tool, it is a portable environment. Cooking may have helped unlock more energy from food, reducing some digestive costs and changing the relationship between diet and brain growth. This does not mean fire alone created the human mind, and the timing remains debated. But the connection between energy, diet, and brain evolution is difficult to ignore. Brains are expensive tissue. They require fuel. A lineage moving toward larger brains must solve the problem of energy somehow, whether through higher quality diets, food processing, cooperation, reduced gut costs, or other interacting changes. Human evolution is not a simple chain in which walking leads to tools. Tools lead to meat. Meat leads to brains, and brains lead to fire. It is a feedback system, with each change altering the value of the others. The chimpanzee branch shows why this feedback did not have to happen. Chimpanzees use tools, eat meat at times, cooperate, remember, communicate, and live in socially complex communities. Yet these traits do not combine in the same runaway pattern. Their anatomy remains tied to climbing and shorter-range ecological strategies. Their communication does not become symbolic language on the human scale. Their tool traditions remain local and limited in cumulative depth. Their diets, though flexible, do not reorganize around controlled fire or large-scale food processing. Evolution does not punish them for this, because in their worlds, the human package is not automatically superior. A chimpanzee does not need pottery, myth, long-distance trade, or grammar to locate fruit, manage rank, fish for termites, or survive a season of scarcity. It needs the right skills for its own path. The human branch, however, becomes increasingly defined by portability. Tools can be carried, food can be transported, fire can be maintained or remade, knowledge can move with the group. Later, shelters, clothing, containers, and symbolic systems will extend this portability even further. The more humans carry their survival system with them, the less bound they become to one narrow habitat. This is one of the deepest differences between the two paths. Chimpanzees remain exquisitely knowledgeable about particular landscapes. Humans increasingly become animals that can take a learned world from one landscape into another, then modify both the knowledge and the place. That ability is powerful, but also disruptive. It allows survival in new regions while loosening the ancient restraints that kept most species closely fitted to their environments. Endurance adds another layer. Compared with chimpanzees, humans are weak in many close physical contests, but humans become remarkable travelers. Long legs, efficient walking, sweating, reduced body hair, balance, and later cultural aids allow members of the human lineage to move across distances that would be costly for other apes. Persistence hunting has often been discussed as one possible later expression of this endurance, though it should not be treated as the single origin of human running or cooperation. More broadly, the human body becomes able to turn distance itself into a survival strategy. A far water source, a seasonal migration route, a carcass found beyond the usual range, a stone outcrop suitable for tool-making, or a refuge from local scarcity can all matter more to a creature built to travel. Movement also changes the mind. A wider range requires wider memory. Seasonal routes, landmarks, danger zones, water, stone sources, animal behavior, plant cycles, and neighboring groups all become part of survival. Social learning becomes more valuable because no individual can personally discover everything. The group becomes a vessel of geography, older knowledge, adult experience, repeated journeys, and learned habits help transform landscapes into remembered networks. In the chimpanzee world, memory is also rich and spatially precise, but the human lineage increasingly stretches memory across larger ranges and eventually across generations with language and story. The map becomes mental before it becomes drawn. With Homo erectus and related forms, the expanding range becomes unmistakable. Human relatives move beyond Africa into parts of Eurasia, carrying bodies and behaviors suited to broader ecological challenges. They are not modern humans, and their lives should not be romanticized as simple triumph. They face cold, heat, predators, unfamiliar foods, disease, isolation, and extinction risks. Yet their dispersal shows that the human path has crossed a threshold. It is no longer only an African ape story. It is becoming a planetary experiment in flexibility. Later, humans will push this experiment much farther, into deserts, coasts, highlands, islands, forests, tundra, and eventually artificial environments built by culture itself. Chimpanzees do not follow this expansion, not because they are lesser, but because their adaptive design is different. Their strength lies in deep local mastery, not in carrying a portable survival system across continents. Their path remains tied to African habitats where their bodies, minds, and social systems continue to make sense. The human path, built from walking, diet flexibility, tools, cooperation, fire, and memory, begins to escape the original frame of ape ecology. That escape will create wonders and catastrophes. It will preserve stories and erase landscapes. It will allow one ape lineage to ask why its cousins stayed in the forest, while forgetting that for millions of years, the forest had been answer enough. For most of the time that people have tried to understand human origins, bones carried the burden of the story: a jaw, a skull, a femur, a tooth, a stone tool beside a layer of ash. These were the witnesses called from deep time. They were precious, but they were also stubbornly incomplete. Bones could show shape, posture, diet, growth, injury, and sometimes relationship. But they could not easily reveal how vanished populations mixed, how often they separated and rejoined, or how many human relatives passed through the world without leaving a recognizable skeleton behind. Then, ancient DNA changed the atmosphere of the entire field. It didn't replace fossils. It did something more unsettling. It made the family tree less like a tree. The human story had already moved beyond the old ladder, but genetics pushed it further. Once researchers began recovering and comparing DNA from living humans and ancient relatives, it became clear that human evolution was not a clean sequence of one species replacing another in a straight line. It was a branching, braided, uneven history. Populations split. Some adapted to local environments. Some vanished. Some met again after long separation and exchanged genes. The descendants of those meetings still carry faint signatures in their bodies today. The past was not a hallway. It was a landscape of overlapping human forms. Neanderthals were the first great shock for many people outside the field, long imagined as brutish side characters in the human drama. They emerged from fossils and genetics as close relatives with deep histories of their own. They lived across Western Eurasia, adapted to Ice Age environments, made tools, used fire, cared for one another in complex social settings, and survived for hundreds of thousands of years before disappearing as a distinct population. Ancient DNA showed that many living people outside Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. This means that when modern humans expanded into Eurasia, they did not simply replace Neanderthals from a distance, at least sometimes. They met them closely enough for descendants to carry the evidence. That discovery matters for the chimpanzee question because it breaks the habit of thinking in simple ranks. Even within the human branch, evolution did not produce one inevitable winner marching alone. There were cousins, there were experiments, there were populations whose bodies, tools, and adaptations made sense in their own worlds, even if they did not survive to the present as separate lineages. Modern humans are not the top rung of a tidy staircase. They are the last surviving twig of a once bushier human branch. Chimpanzees, too, are surviving twigs of their own ancient branch. The living world looks simple only because extinction has done so much editing. Then came the Denisovans, and the story became stranger still. Unlike Neanderthals, Denisovans were not first recognized from a famous skull or a nearly complete skeleton. They were revealed from small fragments, including a finger bone and teeth from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The physical evidence was so slight that, in another era, it might have seemed almost impossible to build a major human origin story from it. But DNA changed the scale of what a fragment could say. Genetic analysis showed that these remains belonged to a previously unknown group of ancient humans, related to Neanderthals but distinct from them. A whole population, perhaps spread across vast parts of Asia, had been hiding inside a few pieces of bone. Denisova Cave became a symbol of a new kind of archaeology, one in which the smallest trace could open a continent-sized mystery. The cave itself sits at a crossroads of landscapes, with evidence of different human groups using the region across long spans of time. Neanderthals were there, Denisovans were there. Modern humans may have moved through nearby worlds later. At least one ancient individual had both Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry, direct evidence that these groups did not exist in sealed compartments. The family tree had become a web with living crossings. The Denisovan story remains full of uncertainty. Scholars still debate what Denisovans looked like, how many populations existed, how far they ranged, and what cultures they carried. Their fossil record is painfully small compared with the genetic shadow they cast. Some remains from East Asia, and the Tibetan plateau may be Denisovan or closely related. But the picture is still developing. What survives in the record suggests a group, or perhaps several related groups, adapted to very different Asian environments over long periods. Their genetic legacy appears in varying degrees in some present-day populations, especially in parts of Oceania, island Southeast Asia, and Asia. One famous Denisovan-related genetic contribution helps some people living on the Tibetan plateau cope with high altitude. A quiet inheritance from vanished relatives still at work in living bodies. This is a powerful reminder that evolution often leaves its legacy in unexpected places. A people can disappear as a distinct population and still remain biologically present. A lineage can vanish from the visible world while part of its adaptation continues inside descendants of another lineage. The boundary between survival and disappearance becomes blurred. Denisovans are gone, yet not entirely gone. Neanderthals are gone, yet not entirely gone. Ancient human diversity is not merely an old collection of bones. It is folded into the genomes of living people. The chimpanzee branch has its own genetic depth as well. Modern sequencing of great ape genomes is revealing population history, diversity, local adaptation, and the fine structure of ape evolution with increasing clarity. Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and humans are not just names on a family diagram. They are living and vanished populations with histories of isolation, expansion, contraction, and adaptation. Genetic research has sharpened estimates of when branches split and has shown how much diversity can exist within a surviving lineage. For chimpanzees, this matters especially because their fossil record is sparse. DNA becomes one of the strongest ways to see that they have not stood still. Genetics also complicates the comparison between human and chimpanzee minds. Much of what separates the two lineages is not simply a list of different genes, but differences in regulation when genes turn on, where they act, and how development unfolds. Human accelerated regions, areas of the genome that changed unusually quickly on the human branch after the split from chimpanzees, have become important clues. Some appear involved in regulating neural development. Other work points towards cell-type specific changes in the human brain, suggesting that the divergence between human and chimpanzee cognition is partly written in the orchestration of development, not only in anatomy. No single genetic switch created humanity, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the direction is clear enough. The human path involved changes in how a primate brain is built over time. Yet the same genetic revolution warns against arrogance. Humans share deep biological inheritance with chimpanzees because the split is recent in evolutionary terms. The differences that feel enormous in daily life are layered over a foundation of kinship. Our bodies still carry the marks of ape ancestry. Our emotions, social instincts, development, and vulnerabilities are not separate from the rest of life. At the same time, chimpanzees carry their own derived changes, their own adaptations, their own genomic record of survival. The comparison is not between a changed species and an unchanged one. It is between two changed relatives. Ancient DNA has therefore altered the meaning of the fork. It shows that the human branch itself was once braided with other human forms, and that living humans are the result of survival mixed with encounter. It also shows that the broader ape family must be understood as a set of evolving lineages, not a frozen backdrop for human exceptionalism. The old ladder collapses. In its place stands something more tangled and more beautiful, an ancient family of apes and humans, branching, crossing, adapting, vanishing, and leaving traces that can sleep for tens of thousands or millions of years before science learns how to hear them. Denisova Cave sits far from the African forests where the human and chimpanzee paths first separated, yet it belongs in this story because it exposes a humbling truth about deep time. Entire kinds of humans can remain almost invisible until the right method reveals them. The cave opens in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, in a landscape of cold valleys, wooded slopes, grasslands, and seasonal movement, a place where different worlds meet. For ancient humans, such a place could offer shelter, vantage, stone, animals, and passage. For modern science, it became something even rarer, a chamber where small remains, sediments, tools, and DNA preserved traces of vanished populations that had once seemed beyond recovery. A few fragments from this cave changed the way researchers imagined the human family, not because they were visually spectacular, but because they carried genetic information strong enough to redraw the map. Before Denisovans were known, the story of recent human relatives was already complicated by Neanderthals. But Neanderthals had bones, skulls, skeletons, recognizable anatomy, and a long history of study. They could be seen before they could be sequenced. Denisovans were different. They entered science almost like a whisper, a small finger bone, large teeth, tiny pieces that did not announce a whole people by their shape alone. Without DNA, these fragments might have remained mysterious, misclassified, or overlooked. With DNA, they revealed a population related to Neanderthals but distinct from them, a human group whose range may have stretched across enormous parts of Asia, even though its physical record remains astonishingly thin. The evidence remains incomplete, but the implication is enormous. The ground can hide not just individuals, but entire branches of humanity. This matters for the larger question of why evolution left chimpanzees on another path, because it warns against mistaking what survives for all that existed. If a group as significant as the Denisovans could remain nearly unseen until genetic methods exposed them, then the absence of fossils along the chimpanzee line becomes less mysterious and less misleading. Time preserves unevenly. Some environments protect bones, others destroy them. Some species live where sediment buries remains quickly. Others live where forests, acidity, scavengers, and erosion erase the body before it can become evidence. The fossil record is not a fair census of the past. It is a record of accidents. Denisova Cave is one of those rare accidents that opens a hidden room in history. The Denisovan discovery also transforms the emotional shape of human evolution. It becomes harder to imagine a single heroic lineage advancing alone through prehistory. Instead, the human branch contains neighbours, Neanderthals, Denisovans, modern humans, and perhaps other poorly known groups overlapped in time and sometimes in space. Some met, some interbred, some exchanged genes that remain in living people. Others vanished without leaving visible descendants, or left traces that are still difficult to identify. The human story becomes a braided river, with channels dividing and joining again. This does not erase the distinctiveness of modern humans, but it removes the illusion of solitude. We were never the only experiment. Denisova Cave itself deepens that sense of overlap. It preserves evidence that different human relatives used the same region across long stretches of time. Neanderthals passed through. Denisovans were there. At least one individual known from the genetic record had both Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry, making contact not an abstract possibility but a biological fact. This does not mean such encounters were common everywhere, nor does it allow easy storytelling about what they looked like, what languages or gestures were used, or how groups understood one another. Scholars still debate the social realities behind the genetic traces, but the DNA makes one thing unavoidable: the boundaries between ancient human populations were sometimes permeable. The most astonishing Denisovan legacy may be the way it survives far from the cave. Some present-day populations carry Denisovan ancestry in varying amounts, especially in parts of Oceania, island Southeast Asia, and Asia. One genetic variant associated with Denisovan ancestry is linked to high-altitude adaptation among people of the Tibetan Plateau, helping the body cope with low oxygen in thin mountain air. This is one of the great strange survivals in human evolution. A vanished population, poorly known from bones, may have contributed an adaptation that still helps living people inhabit one of the harshest environments on Earth. Disappearance, in evolution, is not always total. A people can vanish as a distinct group and still leave behind a useful inheritance, folded into the genomes of others. That lesson loops quietly back to chimpanzees. Their path did not lead into the tangled world of Neanderthals and Denisovans, because those were members of the human branch, after the split from the chimpanzee bonobo lineage. But the method that revealed Denisovans is part of the same scientific revolution that reveals chimpanzee history more clearly. Genomes show branching, diversity, adaptation, isolation, and deep relatedness. They remind us that visible anatomy is only part of the story. The chimpanzee body may seem familiar enough for people to assume they understand it, but the genome shows a living history still shaped by habitat, disease, and population movement. In both cases, DNA teaches humility. It says that the past is larger than bones. The Denisovan mystery also challenges the word disappearance. Neanderthals disappear as a distinct population, yet many humans carry Neanderthal DNA. Denisovans disappear as a recognizable group, yet traces of them persist. Other human relatives vanish completely. As far as current evidence can tell, chimpanzees do not disappear, they endure. But endurance is not the same as remaining unchanged. Their survival has required adaptation across millions of years, even if those adaptations often hide in behavior, immunity, and local ecological fit rather than in the dramatic artifacts humans tend to notice. The vanished humans and the living apes both expose the same problem: the past is not arranged for human convenience. There is a quiet irony here. Humans became the species that digs, sequences, names, compares, and reconstructs. We are the ape that turns bone dust into ancestry and cave sediment into revelation. Yet the more powerful our tools become, the less simple our origin story looks. Each new method removes another piece of certainty. The family tree becomes less like a monument and more like a forest after all, full of crossings, dead branches, hidden roots, and living crowns. Denisova Cave is not central because it explains chimpanzees directly. It is central because it proves how much can be missing from view. If a few fragments in a Siberian cave can reveal an entire human relative, then the shadowed common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees and the sparse record of chimpanzee evolution must be approached with patience rather than assumption. So the cave becomes a warning light in the larger narrative. Do not confuse silence with absence. Do not confuse absence with stillness. Do not confuse the surviving species with the whole story. The chimpanzee path, the human path, the Neanderthal path, the Denisovan path, and the many lost paths that left no name all belong to a deeper pattern of branching life. Some branches remain visible in forests. Some remain visible in faces. Some remain only in a tooth, a finger bone, a layer of sediment, or a stretch of DNA passed quietly from one generation to the next. Evolution does not preserve its records for us. It leaves fragments, and sometimes one fragment is enough to reveal that an entire world was there. By now the question has changed shape. It no longer makes sense to ask why chimpanzees did not become human, as if evolution were a road with one proper destination and one branch simply refused the turn. Chimpanzees did not become human for the same reason horses did not become antelope. Crocodiles did not become birds, and oak trees did not become grasses. They were never moving toward us. They were moving through their own conditions, generation after generation, shaped by what helped them survive and reproduce in the worlds they actually inhabited. Evolution does not look ahead. It does not imagine cities, language, firelight, or spacecraft. It does not reward a lineage for approaching humanity. It rewards whatever works well enough, here and now, under the pressures of a particular life. This is the central correction the whole story demands. Natural selection is not a ladder maker, it is a filter. In every generation, individuals vary. Some variations help slightly, some hurt, many do very little. a stronger grip, a better immune response, a more useful social instinct, a change in timing of development, a body better suited to certain foods or movements. Each can matter if the environment makes it matter. But there is no master plan behind the process. A trait survives not because it is grand, but because it pays its way. The human path appears extraordinary because it eventually produces us, and we are the ones telling the story. From the forest point of view, the chimpanzee path is not a failed attempt at humanity. It is a successful way to remain a chimpanzee. One reason chimpanzees did not become human is anatomical commitment. Once a lineage is built deeply around a certain way of moving and feeding, every later change must work through that inherited structure. Chimpanzees carry a body powerful in the trees, strong in the arms, capable with grasping hands and feet, and effective in a ground and canopy life. Such a body is not halfway to human bipedalism. It is organized around a different compromise. To become human-like in locomotion would require not just standing more often, but reworking the pelvis, feet, legs, spine, skull balance, muscle systems, developmental timing, and patterns of movement. Evolution can produce radical change over long periods, but only when each step along the way remains viable. There is no leap from forest-adapted ape to long-distance upright walker unless the intermediate forms survive their own worlds. The human lineage happened to enter a chain of feedbacks that made upright walking, free hands, dietary flexibility, tool use, cooperation, and later brain expansion increasingly valuable together. That chain was not guaranteed. It depended on environments, inherited variation, population histories, and chance. If early hominin populations had faced different pressures, or if key groups had died out, the path might have ended among the many extinct experiments of the ape family. The fact that it continued does not make it inevitable. It only means that, for certain populations in certain landscapes, the costs of the new strategy were outweighed by its benefits. Chimpanzee ancestors were under different pressures. Their inherited body and social life continued to work well enough in the habitats they occupied. There was no evolutionary reason for them to abandon a successful strategy for one that would be costly before it became useful. A second reason lies in ecology. Chimpanzees remained tied to environments where climbing, fruit knowledge, flexible foraging, and social negotiation were deeply rewarding. Even in more open woodland or savanna mosaics, trees remained vital for feeding, resting, safety, movement, and social life. A human-style body would not automatically be better there. Long legs and arched feet help with distance. But they do not help much when the best food hangs above the ground and the safest route passes through branches. A human hand is wonderfully free, but a chimpanzee foot can still grasp. A human shoulder supports throwing and tool-making in remarkable ways, but a chimpanzee shoulder and arm support a different kind of strength and access. Different worlds reward different bodies. This is one of evolution's simplest lessons, and one of the easiest to forget. A third reason is that intelligence itself took different forms. The human branch became increasingly dependent on cumulative culture knowledge that builds across generations until no individual needs to invent everything from the beginning. This required not only cleverness, but social tolerance, teaching, imitation, communication, shared attention, and eventually symbolic language. Chimpanzees are intelligent, but their intelligence remains more tightly bound to immediate social and ecological problems. They learn by observation, they use tools, they understand aspects of social rank, alliance, expectation, and evidence. They can adapt behavior when circumstances change, but their communication does not open into the same symbolic system, and their technology does not accumulate with the same force. No single explanation fully accounts for this difference. Scholars still debate the roles of brain development, vocal control, social structure, diet, childhood length, cooperation, and ecological pressure. What survives in the evidence suggests that human culture became a self-reinforcing engine, while chimpanzee culture remained a local and embodied tradition. A lesser-known but important detail is that chimpanzees are not simply waiting at the edge of language. Their calls and gestures are complex, and recent research suggests that combinations of calls can expand meaning more flexibly than once assumed. This makes the difference between chimpanzee communication and human language more interesting, not less. The gap is not between noise and speech, or instinct and thought. It is between a meaningful communicative system suited to chimpanzee life and a symbolic, endlessly recombinable language system that transforms human life. Chimpanzees communicate enough to manage their world. Humans evolved a form of communication that eventually allowed them to build worlds that did not yet exist. A fourth reason is social structure. Chimpanzee communities are intense, political, and often organized around rank, male alliances, territory, grooming bonds, and shifting parties within a larger community. Such a system rewards tactical awareness, coalition management, and local knowledge. Human societies eventually evolve different patterns of cooperation, including broader food sharing, extensive teaching, long dependency, wider alliances, and symbolic group identity. These differences are not absolute. Humans can be fiercely territorial. Chimpanzees can cooperate and show deep bonds, but the balance is different. The chimpanzee path did not select for the same expansion of teaching, symbolic norm-making, and large-scale cooperation that later becomes central to human survival. It selected for a powerful social intelligence within a different framework. And finally, there is chance. Evolution is often described as if every outcome were the neat solution to a problem, but history also matters. A population survives a drought while another does not. A river divides a range. A disease reshapes numbers. A small group carries one set of variants and not another. A useful behavior appears in one community and never spreads beyond it. A changing climate opens a corridor for one lineage and closes it for another. The evidence remains incomplete. But the broader principle is clear: evolution is not only adaptation, it is also contingency. The human path is full of accidents that later generations mistake for destiny. So why did evolution leave chimpanzees on another path? Because the path was never behind us. It was beside us, then farther away, then hidden by millions of years of separate change. Chimpanzees continued to solve chimpanzee problems: how to move through trees and ground, how to find food across seasons, how to survive infections, how to learn useful traditions, how to manage alliances, how to defend access to a living landscape, how to raise the next generation within a demanding social world. Humans solved a different set of problems, and eventually created many new ones of their own. The divergence is not a moral ranking, it is a record of different answers. In the forest, a chimpanzee does not look unfinished. It looks exactly like what it is, the living result of another successful experiment in being an ape. Survival is often misunderstood because it is easy to confuse it with dominance. Modern humans cover the planet, reshape climates, cross oceans, build machines, store memory in libraries and servers, and send instruments beyond Earth. From that vantage point, survival can look like expansion, conquest, and control. But for most species, survival is quieter. It is persistence through ordinary pressures. It is finding food when the season turns poor, avoiding infection long enough to reproduce, keeping social bonds intact, learning a landscape well enough to use it, and passing on a body that still works in the world where it wakes. By that older standard, chimpanzees are not evolutionary leftovers. They are survivors of a long and dangerous history, while many other branches closer to us disappeared. The human branch itself is a graveyard of vanished forms. Sahelanthropus, Orrorin, Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other debated or poorly known relatives appear in the record like figures briefly lit by a moving torch. Some lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than modern civilization has existed. Some spread across vast territories. Some adapted to cold, heat, highlands, forests, islands, or open plains. They were not failed drafts waiting for Homo sapiens to arrive. They were real populations living complete lives in their own present. Yet most of them vanished. Only modern humans remain from that once bushy human side of the ape family. Chimpanzees, by contrast, remain as living relatives outside the human branch, along with bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and other apes. Their survival does not mean their path was easier. It means their lineage found a durable way to endure within a narrower ecological frame. Chimpanzees did not need to become city builders to succeed. They needed to remain viable in African forests, woodlands, and forest edge mosaics. Through climatic changes, habitat shifts, disease pressures, competition, and the constant instability of social life. The evidence remains incomplete for much of their deep past, but the living animals and their genomes show a lineage that has not simply waited in place. It has adjusted, diversified, and persisted. This is one of the hidden contradictions in the human story. The branch that became most flexible also became full of extinct relatives. Flexibility opened doors, but it did not protect every group from disappearance. Long-distance movement exposed human relatives to new climates, new predators, new diseases, new competitors, and unstable population sizes. A lineage could expand widely and still collapse locally. It could master fire and tools, yet fail under environmental stress. It could live for hundreds of millennia and still leave no living descendants as a distinct group. Expansion is powerful, but it is not the same as permanence. The human branch burned brightly in many directions, and many of those lights went out. Chimpanzees survived by a different logic. Their path remained more geographically restricted, but within that restriction they developed a deep fit to place. They are not generalists in the human sense, able to carry a cultural survival system into deserts, tundra, islands, and cities. They are ecological experts with flexibility inside a particular range of problems. They know fruiting cycles, termite mounds, nut trees, water sources, sleeping sites, and territorial boundaries. They adjust party size to food and social conditions. They learn from others. They maintain bonds through grooming and proximity. They use tools where tools matter. They respond to rivals, disease, seasonal scarcity, and opportunity. Their world is not small to them. It is dense. Climate change has repeatedly altered African habitats over the last several million years. Forests expanded and contracted. Dry periods reshaped ranges. Rivers and barriers influenced population structure. Some ape habitats became fragmented. For chimpanzees, such changes likely caused local losses, separations, and adaptations. No single explanation fully accounts for how their ancestors passed through every climatic turn, because the fossil and genetic evidence still leaves gaps. But survival through such shifts would have required enough behavioral and biological flexibility to keep populations viable when landscapes changed. A species deeply tied to trees can still persist if it can use different kinds of wooded habitat, alter ranging patterns, exploit fallback foods, and carry social knowledge across generations. Genetic diversity adds another layer to this survival. Chimpanzee populations are not interchangeable copies of one another. Different groups have different histories, shaped by geography, isolation, contact, and local selection. Some adaptations may reflect habitat differences. Others may reflect disease pressures, including infections that have stalked African primates for immense spans of time. This means chimpanzee survival is partly a story of local answers. A population does not need to solve every possible ecological problem. It needs to solve the ones that return again and again in its own range. The same principle shaped humans. But human culture eventually allowed some solutions to travel farther from their original environments. Chimpanzee solutions remained more deeply rooted. There is also a social dimension to endurance. Chimpanzee communities can be tense, competitive, and territorial, but their social systems also provide structure. Alliances influence rank. Grooming maintains relationships. Young individuals learn by staying near experienced members of the group, watching, practicing, and slowly acquiring the skills of their community. Here the child safety of the natural world is not a sentimental matter. It is protective dependence, social learning, and close care. The long period of development allows knowledge to pass through attention rather than instruction in the human sense. Chimpanzees do not need classrooms to inherit a world. They inherit it by watching bodies move through it. Modern humans sometimes imagine that survival requires constant innovation. Chimpanzees show another truth. Sometimes survival requires faithful competence. A technique that works does not need to become an industry. A tool tradition does not need to become metallurgy. A social bond does not need to become law. A remembered landscape does not need to become a written map. Chimpanzees endure because their way of life continues to match enough of their world, not because it grows without limit. Human culture is extraordinary partly because it escapes limits, but escaping limits can become dangerous. A species that can transform landscapes can also destroy the conditions that sustained it. Chimpanzees did not take that path, and for millions of years they did not need to. Yet their survival today is fragile. The ancient pressures that shaped chimpanzees were difficult, but modern pressures created by humans are different in speed and scale. Habitat loss, fragmentation, hunting, disease transmission, and climate disruption threaten populations that survived countless older changes. This fact should be handled carefully, without turning the script away from deep history, but it belongs here because it reveals a bitter irony. The human branch that once diverged beside chimpanzees has become one of the greatest dangers to them. Our success has entered their forest, our roads, farms, markets, borders, and diseases reach into landscapes where their ancestors endured for millions of years. Scholars still debate many details of chimpanzee deep history, but no one needs a fossil to see that their future is now entangled with ours. So survival without becoming us is not an inferior outcome. It is the entire point. Chimpanzees remained chimpanzees because their lineage continued to make that life possible. Many human relatives became more like us in some ways than chimpanzees ever did, and still disappeared. Some walked upright, made tools, used fire, ranged across continents, adapted to cold, and perhaps carried forms of culture that would have astonished us if we could witness them. They are gone. Chimpanzees remain, not as ancestors, not as primitive shadows, but as living cousins whose existence exposes the narrowness of our assumptions. Evolution did not leave them behind. It left them here, on a branch that survived by another rule, not endless expansion, not symbolic conquest, but deep continuity with a world of trees, memory, bodies, alliances, and seasons. The forest mirror is uncomfortable because it does not give back a simple reflection. A chimpanzee face can seem close enough to unsettle the human observer, the forward eyes, the expressive mouth, the hand resting against bark with almost familiar patience, the social attention that feels less like instinct than presence. Yet the longer one looks, the more the reflection breaks apart. The body in the branches belongs to another life. Its strength gathers in different places. Its world is organized by trees, fruiting seasons, rank, grooming, danger, calls, and the invisible geography of a community range. It is kin, but not a copy. It is near, but not waiting to become us. That tension between recognition and distance is where the true lesson of the human-chimpanzee split lives. For centuries, humans have looked at other animals and searched for themselves. Sometimes this has led to insight, because kinship is real. Sometimes it has led to arrogance, because humans have often mistaken difference for deficiency. Chimpanzees force a more careful view. They are enough like us to disturb old boundaries, and different enough to reveal that evolution can build many forms of intelligence, society, and survival from shared material. They use tools, but not like humans. They learn traditions, but not with the same accumulating force. They communicate meanings, but not with human symbolic language. They cooperate and compete, bond and separate, remember and anticipate. But their lives do not unfold inside myths, laws, maps, written names, or imagined futures in the human sense. The difference is not small, it is immense, but it is not the difference between a finished being and an unfinished one. The mirror also shows how strange humans are. Habitual bipedalism, long childhood, language, teaching, fire, technology, symbolic thought, large-scale cooperation, and cumulative culture form a combination unlike anything else among living apes. Each piece has roots in older primate capacities, but the combination becomes explosive. A hand freed from walking becomes a maker's hand. A social mind becomes a political and moral mind. A call system becomes language. A remembered path becomes geography, then story, then map. A tool becomes a tool tradition, then a craft, then an industry. A hearth becomes a gathering point, then a village, then a city. At each stage, older ape abilities are stretched until they create a world no chimpanzee needs, and no chimpanzee lineage was ever selected to build. Yet the human path is not pure ascent, it is also loss. The human foot no longer grips branches. The body no longer reads the canopy with chimpanzee confidence. Modern humans often cannot name the plants outside their own homes, much less track fruiting cycles across a forest. Many people live surrounded by tools so advanced that the basic skills of survival have been outsourced to invisible systems. The human mind can imagine the deep past and future galaxies. but it can also become lost in its own inventions. Chimpanzees remind us that intelligence once meant knowing a living place intimately. Their world is not primitive because it lacks writing. It is dense with knowledge that does not need to leave scratches on stone to be real. What survives in the record suggests that the split between humans and chimpanzees was never a judgment. It was a divergence shaped by habitat, anatomy, diet, disease, social life, development, and chance. The human branch leaned into upright travel, flexible diets, expanding cooperation, and eventually a brain shaped by unusual developmental and regulatory changes. The chimpanzee branch leaned into forest and woodland mastery, climbing strength, fission fusion society, local tradition, and adaptation to particular ecological pressures. Scholars still debate the exact body of the last common ancestor, the timing and texture of the split, and the pressures that mattered most. But the broad outline is clear: both lineages changed. Both lineages inherited an ancient ape foundation. Both lineages became something new. This is why the word left in the title carries a hidden trap. Evolution did not leave chimpanzees anywhere, as if abandoning them beside a road while humans walked onward. Evolution has no road. It has only branching outcomes. From one vanished population came descendants that met different tests. Some descendants became hominins, and most of those hominins disappeared. One became Homo sapiens, a species that survives partly because culture became a second inheritance system, faster than genes and capable of turning weakness into strategy. Other descendants became the ancestors of chimpanzees and bonobos, surviving in their own forms, shaped by African landscapes that continued changing around them. The paths did not divide into better and worse. They divided into different. There is a deeper humility in this. Humans often measure evolutionary success by what humans value: intelligence like ours, language like ours, tools like ours, expansion like ours. But if success means persistence, chimpanzees have carried their branch through millions of years of danger. If success means fit to environment, their bodies and minds remain powerful answers to the forest's demands. If success means influence over the planet, humans stand alone among apes. But that kind of success is young, unstable, and dangerous. It has lasted only a blink compared with the time since the fork. No single explanation fully accounts for why one surviving ape lineage became so transformative while its closest cousins remained rooted in older ecological worlds. The answer is not one trait. It is the long interaction of many traits, each becoming more meaningful because of the others. The mirror in the forest therefore asks humans to hold two truths at once. We are animals, related by blood to the beings watching from the branches. We are also unusual animals, changed by language, memory, fire, tools, and shared imagination until our lives became almost unrecognizable from the world that shaped our bodies. Chimpanzees show the kinship. The differences show the distance. Between them lies the most important lesson: humanity did not rise above nature so much as become one of nature's strangest consequences. And somewhere behind both faces, human and chimpanzee, stands the missing ancestor, the vanished ape of the late Miocene. Neither one thing nor the other by modern categories. It does not know it will become a question. It does not know that one branch of its descendants will sequence genomes, debate fossils, and build stories about lost beginnings. It does not know that another branch will move through forests with dark hands and watchful eyes, carrying a different inheritance into the present. The ancestor is gone, but the fork remains alive every time a human looks at a chimpanzee and feels the shock of recognition without identity. The forest gives back no simple answer. It gives back a family resemblance, a warning against ladders, and a glimpse of how many ways there are to survive time. The forest grows quieter as the long story settles back into darkness. Not because the questions are finished, but because deep time never gives all of itself away. It leaves a skull here, a tooth there, a footprint pressed into ash, a fragment of DNA sleeping in bone, a living face in the trees that feels both familiar and unreachable. From these traces, a picture begins to form, but it is never complete. The missing ancestor remains missing. The first separation remains blurred. The exact pressures that turned one ape lineage toward upright walking and another toward forest mastery remain partly hidden beneath millions of years of rain, roots, erosion, and silence. Yet perhaps the incompleteness is part of the truth. Evolution is not a clean story written for human understanding. It is a long weather of change, working through hunger, birth, disease, movement, memory, chance, and survival. It does not crown a winner. It does not preserve every branch. It does not explain itself. One lineage learns to carry fire. Another learns the old paths of fruiting trees. One stores memory in symbols. Another stores it in bodies, habits, roots, and watching eyes. One transforms the planet. Another remains closer to the green world where the shared story began. Chimpanzees are still there, not behind us, but beside us in the only way deep relatives can be beside one another after 6 million years, close enough to remind us, distant enough to humble us. Their existence says that humanity was not the inevitable end of ape evolution. It was one outcome among many, built from accidents and adaptations layered together until they became a new kind of power. Our path gave us language, science, memory beyond death, and the ability to ask why the fork happened at all. Their path preserved another answer, a life of touch, strength, alliance, patience, and knowledge held inside the forest itself. In the end, the mystery is not only why chimpanzees followed another path, it is why our own path happened at all, and how easily it might not have. Somewhere in the lost landscapes of Africa, the ancestor of both lines moved through branches without knowing it carried futures inside its blood. The trees shifted, the climate changed, populations divided. Time opened its quiet hand, and from one vanished beginning came 2 living mirrors, one looking outward across the world, the other watching from the leaves, both carrying the memory of a fork no eye ever saw.